want to spoil it. Something interesting though, so it should be fun. It looks like he actually just popped on right now, so I'm going to bring him in 2 seconds. Just let him set up real quick. Everybody, if you're here with us live though or watching later, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and share. And before I get into conversations and forget, don't forget to check out Jason Storey's Discord server. I just linked it. It's also linked down in the description as well. It's in chat. And check out the multiplayer mastery course, which I just linked through. It lies right there. It says next lesson is Monday. Next lesson is actually Friday, which is in like 2 days. Anyway, I am going to bring out Jason Storey, and I think we're going to have some fun. You ready, Jason? All right, sweet. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. I was just getting ready to record a quick video covering some of the stuff that I did a terrible job of explaining about the mastery course. I keep getting a lot of questions that I know in my head the answer to, and I'm realizing when I look back at like the page for it that I didn't put any of this stuff down. Like so much stuff I didn't talk about. Everything from the schedule of the calls, the fact that the calls are all recorded and optional, that people don't have to necessarily attend, all of the different features and things that we're actually covering in the extraction game and stuff. I realized like I didn't list all of the different systems, the inventory, the combat systems, the persistent setups, any of that stuff. So I went through and was just doing a kind of a quick overview of all of that stuff, and I was going to do a little video about it. But like I said, I think that this is more interesting. If people want to see that, they can go look at the page. I just linked it. Go see some of the updates there. But I think the discussion for the topic that you had mentioned in chat seemed really interesting. So you want to tell everybody what that was, and we can just talk about it a little bit and get everybody's feedback in chat?
You'll have to remind me which one, because there was a few things we talked about, but I have been saying that.
I was saying your most recent thing about trying to come up with video ideas.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that's what I'm working on. I guess if other people find it interesting, then why not? Start of new year, everyone's making new plans. I put a very small video on my second channel that basically said exactly this. But new year, everyone's making new stuff. Everyone's planning for what they're going to be doing. I'm no different, and so in my case, I'm first of all, I like to make a large list of all possible ideas, and then because I find I've said this before, friction's the big killer, right? Whenever you sit down to do something, every step between you doing it and like deciding to do it is a reason to give up. And so I'm terrible at that. So I like to give myself less and less excuses. And so step one is I write down 50 or 100 ideas, and then I have all of them there. And the next time I sit down, I can like make progress on some of them, and then I even have like a separate machine set up to make things faster for producing things. So long story short, making a large collection of ideas for what the next year is going to bring. And I was just curious what everyone else is making and planning.
It looks like Steamboat Willie Games now that it's up from public domain.
Horror, of course, is going to have to be a horror game. It's going to be one of those.
I saw that. I don't know if you already saw that first one. Yeah, that's good stuff. So trying to come up with 50 ideas for game dev related videos that people will find interesting, right? Which I think this is perfect. You got an audience to ask and get some suggestions and probably get some ideas going. What's the do you already have a list going? You're trying to come up with 50. How many do you have on there right now?
Well, I've already passed my list. I've already gotten like 55 so far.
Okay, good.
But hey, more ideas, all the better.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get even broader. For me personally, I've sort of been limiting myself internally as game dev hyper specific stuff. But something I always talk about is that I have a lot of intersecting interests, and they all inform game design things. I've mentioned before how architecture is a really cool thing that teaches you a lot about level design. Color theory is not really about games, but it's useful for everything from marketing to choosing color palettes for your games. And so my list collection is as broad as TV shows I think teach people a lot about perspective and framing, all the way up from books I've liked, and then I have other more specific stuff like explaining what Liskov substitution is or why the law of Demeter is important. So I've got a wide range from programming technical up to just sort of or just life stuff. Things like people should learn mnemonic devices and why that's a valuable thing. So I'm going to try to branch out this year into more broad topics and sort of set the expectation that not everything is going to be a technical, hyper-specific programming video.
So is not everything going to be like a design pattern mixed?
They'll be there, but yeah, not everything. Not everything.
Yes. Okay, that actually sounds pretty interesting. Trying to kind of mix it up. And Jason said maybe some art related ideas. How do you feel about doing art related videos? That's the one place that I kind of avoid because I feel like my art is always terrible. I just don't like, and I don't really enjoy doing it, and the end result is usually relatively bad. Like I said, you can see my webpage designs, they're pretty bad. Like, I hate doing it.
I'm the same. Art is particularly bad for me, but something that I struggled with, but I've accepted now, is you have to choose your baseline. It's the classic of, are you measuring yourself against a professional artist, or are you measuring yourself against yourself from 10 years ago or 2 years ago? And by that standard, I realized something I used to hate in Unity specifically is everything looked like a Unity demo. I'd make little GIFs or videos, and people would be like, that's the default skybox, that's the default camera, it looks like Unity. Yeah. And over time, I fixed that, and I didn't really notice it. And so when I think about game art, people are now like, oh, that looks really nice, or are you using this render pipeline and that kind of thing. So I've realized if I set my bar not to pixel art that I can't do, or, designing complex, cool models, and just go, hey, maybe there's other devs out there who like to just make little demo videos to show people, either clients or just for family and friends, and they'd like to make it not look like an out-of-the-box tech demo. And so I guess by that standard, I don't mind doing art stuff as long as it's art for devs. So, the highest you'll ever get is here, but it might move you a little bit higher the needle than where you currently are. Because I'm talking to myself from 2 years ago or 5 years ago,
Yeah, no, I think videos like that could be useful, especially if you did just some beginner videos on things like lighting, understanding just kind of the different parts of lighting and setting that stuff up, and the post effects. And if you did them as relatively small bite-sized chunks, right? Like video on how to add a vignette, show the basics, show a couple extra things, but then go into how to light this area nicely, for maybe different kinds of lights, something kind of covering the different sections of the light, the different options on there that kind of explains what they do. I think just I feel like little bite-sized things like that where people can go. So a lot of people are new. They're gonna go like, how do I make this look better? But if you give them too much, they just get overwhelmed, and if it doesn't all apply, it gets really confusing. But give them little bits of how to get started with making things look pretty.
Like one of them, it's such a dumb little example, but it blew my mind when I first learned it, is just setting the clear flag on the camera to solid color and just going, you know what, I don't have the time and resources to make a big dramatic scene to demonstrate this little mechanic or idea, but I want to show it to people. And it just looks terrible if it's just in the default sky area room floating with no defaults. But if you just set it to a nice cream colored background, or if it's a white shaped object to a nice colorful background like an orange or a purple, it pops. And it's like, oh, it's very visually aesthetic to just pick a contrasting color, understand the basic of complementary colors, set a single color background, and all of a sudden your example GIF image goes from being something which looks like someone just pressed record in the editor to like a little framed scene. So that one caught me off guard. It's like, actually, that is a lot of bang for your buck in like a drop down single option.
That seems like a good one too. And then Twist Liver mentioned wanting more Fmod examples. I think those are good. They're pretty limited though on the number of people who are going to watch and use them, just because it's such an advanced topic and you have to really kind of be at that problem. And I feel like 9 out of 10 game devs don't remember that there is audio in the games.
It's funny you say that. So I actually have all of these, right? So on just that topic alone, I have what's the different software you can use for making audio? Things like Buskicule and the other different things. That's one video idea. Another one is different types of dynamic music in games. Vertical integration versus horizontal integration, how you make different stems, why you need to have tails, what a coda is, all of that stuff. Next is beat detection in games. What is a BPM? How does it work? How do you calculate the BPM for a song? How to use it to get beat maps? Another one. Then I have different ways to approach audio in Unity. We could do explaining native audio, explaining master audio, explaining all the different types of solutions. Fmod is an option, not going into detail, but explaining why each one exists, what it's for. Then why I personally like Fmod, what it does for you, games that have used it, examples of what the interface looks like, and how it can facilitate new kinds of features that the default ones can't. Then how to set up Fmod could be a separate video. How to use audio spectrum data in Unity. So if you wanted to have things like bouncing to the audio and beat, explaining how to have dynamic waveforms, generate those kinds of things. Then there's a different strategy for that with Fmod. So that's a different video. Then if you want to make a rhythm game, how to do beat maps with things like lyrics using something like Choreographer, and then how to combine it all together to make reactive, Guitar Hero style games. So just on that topic alone, I have like 15 different ideas. So I have been thinking about
way too many audio ideas. It's not that they're bad or anything. You're very heavy on the audio stuff.
Well, that's the thing. I have 60 videos. That's the thing is I'm 60 so far, so I'm kind of going. It's less
Still,
about.
That's like 25% for something that gets like 1% of people. I'm curious. Just for everybody in chat, do you play and test with audio muted the entire time and then forget that there's audio in your game until the last second, like I do? Because it happens to me almost all the time. Like, oh yeah, somebody played with sound on again. I forgot about that. Got to go back and fix everything. Used to happen all the time when it had QA teams and just send them stuff and they're like, yeah, why is there no sound on this level? Like, oh yeah, I forgot we have sound.
I've done that myself. Yeah, I have done that. When it gets to especially when people have opening music, which is really high volume, it drives me insane. But my counterpoint, I guess, is I do have a lot of more approachable video ideas, but I've been thinking about what's the saying? Be the change you want to see in the world. And I think the two things that personally are most limiting or missing from the game industry, at least in the indie space, is understanding narrative and understanding audio. And so I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe want to do those things better, who want to have engaging stories, who want to have interesting dynamic music. But those two topics are, as you said, rightfully so complicated that people are afraid to touch them. And so I thought it might be good, even if I only go as far on my channel as pointing out channels you should go to if you care, that could be a good starting point. But there is certainly a lot of interesting topics there. And so I kind of want to touch a bit more this year on not just how to set up ink, but like how do you craft interesting characters and what makes a good branching dialogue versus a bad one. So basically, there is a disproportionate weight on topics I think would benefit the community that aren't being done because I feel like I would have wanted them and couldn't find them.
Oh, I think that's good. I think those are kind of the things that are great to do. Audio is one of those that I think gets totally ignored. So if you can do a good job on those, I think people will really appreciate it. There's I see a technical sound designer in chat. So what do you say? Hold on. I want to pop it up, but I want to go back to this question. I'm a technical sound designer, so some sort of sound is always on, but because I know things can get annoying, I always try to get volume settings in early. I think something like that could be good too, like showing how to do the. Do you already have a video that does that, showing how to do the mixers and volume control with a UI setup? Like just
I never actually covered that. No, it was one of those ones I thought about doing. But I don't know. It's as weird as it sounds. It's so boring to do. It's vital, but it's one of those things that's so boring conceptually that I always find myself skipping over it.
I feel like you could do it in like 10 minutes. You could show the entire thing, start to be, and you don't have to. I feel like it's important. You don't have to go overboard and like make it, super complicated. Just show like, hey, here's how you hook up the sliders to the audio mixer and go.
Yeah, and even like little things too. So doing the mixer groups, making sure things like setting the default volume, how to save it out, because another problem I've seen is people have an issue saving the volume because it either messes up the 0 to 1 decimal versus or the logarithmic one. And then the other one is a lot of people have trouble with the relationship between a volume slider, a save file, and the volume itself. And what order do you update which? Because you get into that weird scenario where you either fire events constantly, or it doesn't synchronize with the file, but it does with the slider, or the slider's out of sync with the audio. So just like little things like that might be.
It's like you're loading your save level, but then the volume slider overwrites it after it loads, and then you no longer get. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And the short answer to that whole thing is the sliders have the ability to set value without notify. A lot of people don't use that feature, which is vitally important to keep things in sync.
Yeah, that it's a good one too. So there's a bunch of comments here I wanted to hit, but this one from Keith, there was a question about promotional merchandise, and there's some talk in chat. If you wanted to do like t-shirts, figures, and hardcovers and maps, they are accessible. They're not cheap though, so I would minimize them unless you have like a good use case for them, because they tend to be pretty expensive. And if you do them yourself and you try sending them out yourself, it's much more expensive than you're probably thinking. Getting something, like 1,000 posters shipped to your house is relatively cheap. Shipping out 1,000 posters to all of the individual people, drastically more expensive. So I would go with, some of the people are in chat recommending drop shipping type options. That's what I've used in the past. I've done them with the courses. It included some promotional stuff in the past. It works pretty well, but you do have the situations of them sending the wrong things to the wrong people, losing things and breaking stuff on occasion. It's happened more times than I could count. So it's one of the reasons that I stopped including it in all the bundles, just because it got to be too many problems with the shipping and those things all changing. But it is certainly possible, as long as you don't try to do it as like a profitable thing. It's very difficult to, I'd say, make money on those. Have you done anything like that before with companies doing custom shirts and all that kind of stuff?
Not personally. I have worked with a few companies that have, and I had some much smarter people than I give me advice on it. And in general, the advice I heard was, one, if you're doing something like a Kickstarter campaign, avoid physical rewards wherever possible, unless it's like a very limited run for a specific group of people. Just like what you said, it is not about profitability. You can approach it like one of three different ways. You can aim to make money by doing general merch, in which case the only real way to do that is bulk order fulfillment center kind of stuff, which is going to cost you a lot up front, and you'll often be sitting on stock and it'll be a whole lot of issues, and you have to deal with oftentimes back and forthing with the manufacturer to make sure you don't get bad runs of products, and it can be a headache, but it's technically possible to make profits that way. The more realistic answer is, as kind of you were saying, for people who aren't familiar, the other way is you don't do it yourself. You pay a company and they will print on demand, and then as you print on demand, there's less revenue for you because they're not doing it in bulk and they don't have a preset order, but it's more reliably one-to-one in that you can deal with problems as they arise and you're not paying for the upfront cost. But as you said, you're not making any real profit on that. So the advice I was told was that aim for the white glove treatment, as they say. So if you want to do this, start with the option that has the least margin, like a small run of that kind of thing. See if it goes well, and then if it does, scale it up slowly. And if it scales up slowly, then you can possibly pivot to finding somewhere, preferably in your local area or town, because that's somewhere you can literally have a good relationship with, and then scale it up from there. But the general advice is don't do it. That's usually, and this is all third hand, but this is people I know that have like scaled up t-shirts and productions of stuff quite large from their products. But generally not advised, I guess, is the short answer.
Yeah. Same with like doing them as Kickstarter gifts and other things. It always ends up being way more complicated and expensive than people expect, and for very, very little benefit. People don't care too much about a specific shirt for things. I mean, sometimes like a custom map and stuff is kind of neat and cool, but still 50% are just going to go straight to the trash and they'll ignore or just get ignored. I like the comment here though. Give me 50 game ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say the other part of it too. This gets more meta into the concept of why you're doing merch. People do merch because people want to have some kind of shareable thing for their work, and it goes one of two ways. If you're doing it as a reward for a Kickstarter, you're doing it to reward audience engagement with something more personal and something more shareable. Realistically, it's not marketing. You're not going to get sales because someone wore your shirt. It's more of a reward for the person. And if that's the question, then realistically, if I was that person, having my name in the game somewhere is worth 10 times more to me. That's a much more personal thing that I can bring a friend over and walk to a location and see my name on a wall or send in my picture or something. So if you're trying to reward your audience, realistically, rewarding them by engaging them in the process is more rewarding to them and often cheaper for you. So that tends to be the better option for that. But if you do want merch, yeah, you can pick something simpler for bulk stuff like shirts or pins or something and try to get a design done. But yeah, my point is there are other ways to reward your audience if that's your goal, and I'd look into those first.
Yeah, I totally agree. This comment, I popped it up because I was just wondering, did you use ChatGPT at all for your
Not at
initial
all.
50 ideas?
Not a single one yet. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not against the idea. I will eventually, but probably what I'll do is I'll give it the whole list and say add some, because then it knows what I'm aiming for rather
Yes.
than starting with nothing.
It'll have a good idea of what kind of things you're looking for and what you're missing. That seems like the way to go. Yeah. Now, there was also VFX Sector mentioned some about making grid games. I was thinking you might have some thoughts on this one, like an app or an asset or something that just does this. But they said it's odd how many old games are grid based, but trying to make a grid based game in Unity seems harder than using the built-in navigation. Which now I think it might be, because the new built-in navigation is so damn simple to use. You add an agent and add a surface and hit bake once and you're done. Like it's nice how it just goes down and finds all the children now and works off mesh colliders or renderers. And yeah, I did a quick video on it yesterday, I think it was. Yeah, just because the nav system's changed a lot for anybody who hasn't used it in the last couple of years. If you've still been, last time you used it was an older version, or if you're still using older versions of Unity, where it has the old one built in. So yeah, you got thoughts on building grid stuff? Have you built grid games lately?
I mean, that's not that surprising, because if you think about it, the original point was, in order to have a large content, you would need to have some kind of spatial world to work from. And so people would start with the grid system, and then when they wanted navigation, they would then A star on the grid system. And so it was the foundational thing up. But if you're using a nav mesh, you're already starting from the AI down. And so you don't really have the same mandatory requirements. So a lot of people, but in terms of, is it harder? It's not harder. It's just that you have to think about it that way. I probably made 5 or 6 grid systems myself. I've watched CodeMonkey's video on it. I'm pretty sure GameDev Guide did one a while back as well. I've looked into the 5 or 6 different ways to do it, how to do it with different, hex grids versus using just different coordinates for the normal grids, whether it's 2D or 3D spatial partitioning, the different consequences of each of the side effects of those. And so there are lots of fun ways to do it, but I would say my short, broad answer is, as CodeMonkey rightfully points out, it's actually really simple. Like the fundamentals of a grid system is like 4 variables and a couple of loops. It's basically the entire thing. All of the features layered on top of that is architecture of your own choices. But the actual technology basically is, you take a coordinate space, you divide it by the cell size, and you have a position, and then you round it out, and you're now inside of a grid square. And all you have to do now is take those IDs and do something with it, partition it or create an inverse or an index of some kind to look it up and whatever. And so if you want a grid system, again, it's very simple to set up. It's probably all the other stuff you're not familiar with, like setting up a visualizer to render it, or to have some kind of or the actual data storage that binds to the different grid cells. That's the more complicated stuff that sits on top. Or doing custom nodes that then have your weights for your A star, or the other kind of additional features.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to figure. It depends a lot on what the game actually ends up being, like how that grid aligns with it. If there's only one grid, if the entire thing is grid based, or you just got grids for destinations and placement stuff, or
my one critique on CodeMonkey's one, by the way, really like his system. I've actually used it in many game jam style projects for client stuff. The one thing I don't like is when he's detecting the grid cell position in his existing systems, he uses the raycast against a collider surface. But you don't really need to do that. There's an actual plane class in Unity where you can define the coordinate plane of a surface, and you can raycast onto the plane surface, which completely negates the need for having colliders and raycasts and other complicated stuff, because all you're doing is you're basically saying, given a coordinate plane rotated at this angle, where would this hit and how would it translate to a position? So I tend to switch it up, and I end up using a custom plane object built off a transform. It's one subtle change in the entire system, but it's a little bit more performant and avoids having to have a giant collider floor.
Can you send me a link to how to do that later? I want to check that out. That sounds interesting. I haven't seen that. That seems like an interesting one to dig into. So there's like a million. I was way too slow at looking through these comments. Wow. Okay. Let me pop up this one by Jason. If anybody's got more video ideas for Storey too, drop them in the comments. I want to keep coming up with some and chatting about them. Jason Levitt here asked or said, I really enjoy your videos about breaking into the industry. Would love to hear more about the pros and cons of AAA versus working on AA or mobile, since the industries are so different. I would say that the biggest pros to the like AA side versus AAA is you're going to have more control. You're going to be in a smaller setup where you'll have a bit more control over more things. You'll get more access to more different areas of things and of the code, because you're going to probably have a team of 20 to 30, 40 people. AA or AAA team, you're probably going to have a giant team of 100 plus developers, probably somewhere between 30 and 100 programmers, usually lower than 100, but 30 plus. And you're going to be on some pretty specific stuff, and you'll get kind of pigeonholed into things if you're not careful. You could get stuck just working on one tiny little system, and that's all you work on for years and years and years if you're not careful. But there's the benefits of AAA is that there are so many people there that if you actually put in the effort to go around and learn all of the different parts and try them, there's usually a lot of opportunity for it, and there's a lot of opportunity for growth in those companies. AAA companies are the ones that kick off new projects constantly, have new teams going. I don't know how many developers I saw go from like being a junior developer, junior designer, junior programmer over to being a programmer on the new thing or a designer on the new project, and then within a year or two leveling up to seniors and then leads and stuff. It's a really good way to get into different things. There's a whole bunch of projects at almost any AAA studio, so you've got that opportunity. When mobile has the advantage of typically, from what I've seen, they tend to be pretty flush on cash. They tend to pay really well and have I don't know. What do you take? Hop on this story. What do you think?
I admit this is one that I don't have as much experience as you. I have nothing particularly interesting to add, because for me, it always perplexes people. But I've said from the start, I've had no interest in getting into the AAA games industry. I can respect the value of what it is, and I enjoy playing big games. But I look at big games as being like the movie industry. It's a bunch of talented people working together to make a big thing. But realistically, those same people can work in smaller stuff and they'll have more fun. It may not be as prestigious. You might not be able to point to it in storefronts as much, but you tend to have more control, more fun at a smaller scale. And there's a reason why a lot of AAA people end up leaving and making their own smaller studios. And so I just decided to take the shortcut, and rather than getting burnout in a AAA place, just start with the indie stuff.
Yeah. I said Dave said there are a lot of mobile AAA developers. That's true. I think most people, when they're thinking AAA, like thinking console and high end PC for the most part, but there are definitely some up there on the mobile side doing that too. I would bet that a lot of them have teams that are built more like a AA sized company though, where they're not these giant teams building stuff. For most,
there's also sub companies too. Like for a lot of people who haven't worked in those bigger industries, oftentimes a company will have a certain amount of money, the departments will have a certain amount of money, and they'll have a load of different targets to hit of like make us more money, but there won't be specific goals. And so their managers will be freewheeling ideas, and sometimes those ideas are, we're going to spin off 2 or 3 smaller sub teams or groups to go make something. And so now you've got a budget and you have to hit a mark. And so sometimes bigger companies actually have an indie game studio in-house. And so if you talk to a lot of people who work in those bigger companies, sometimes their entire game dev team is like 5 people or 4 people that have been tasked with test a prototype, make sure it's viable. And if it is, we'll, send it up the flagpole, get some more funding and do something big. So I've heard of a few people that have gotten to have particularly fun jobs in large companies because their actual job is make game jams internally, which is a cool gig. And I had a couple of job offers like that I was tempted to take, but in the long run I chose against it.
Yeah, a lot of games I've seen have come up from exactly that. I remember at even at Sony, that's how PlanetSide came about. And I think a couple of the other games were kind of similar, but I think PlanetSide was, I could be wrong. I think it might have been Kevin though that started the first one. I know it was Kevin and Lenny that kicked off the second one. They were just all about it, and it was just the two of them. Then they got approval to kind of go off and do it on the side as an indie, not an indie project, but a smaller independent group in the company building it, and then prototyping it out to see if it was going to be fun, and then turned into a big AAA game, like a lot of them do. So I think it's one of the cool things. Like you said, it's one of those you have to push for though, and you have to like ask, and you have to make the argument and explain why it's good, because everybody wants to make their own thing there. So you've got to give a good reason for why your thing is the right one. It's also something I think Unity should do. I still think it would be great if Unity just had like an internal small indie studio where they just cranked out a bunch of games and then figured out some stuff that was fun, but did it for both for the point of making games that are going to be good and big hits, but also like the internal development cycle. And I know they have a lot of feedback that they get from people that are that they work with externally, but I still feel like a small thing where they're just stealing people internally to work on it and to help, even if it's just like, we steal the graphics, a couple people from the graphics team for a couple of days to look at this and show them all the issues, and then they fix it alongside and kind of help improve the APIs and stuff, and in the engine as a whole. I think that something like that would be good. And then eventually making their own Fortnite.
Isn't that what happened? Yeah, Fortnite. Isn't that what happened with the localization system? Wasn't didn't they have that internal team making the Chop Chop game, and then because of that they needed a localization system, and because of that they started making different prototypes, and that's kind of how we end up getting a localization system almost officially from Unity. So I think dog fooding is very important for that. It is funny how many pretty obvious things you miss if you're not coming at things from the perspective of a consumer. I was complaining earlier. One of my favorite bits of software, Eagle. They they gave me a beta update for the app, and on the beta update it popped up and says new beta installed. Click here for release notes. And I click the release notes, nothing happens. I'm like, oh, that's frustrating, but it's fine. The link doesn't work. So I go to their website and I look for release notes. They're not there. I go to their documentation. It's not there. I go to their community tab. It's not there. And then I reach out to somebody I know. They're like, oh, hey, do you know where this is? And like, oh, it's on the Discord. I'm like, where's the Discord? Okay, so I go to the community tab, no link to Discord. I go to the contact us section, no link to the Discord. And after going down this rabbit hole, eventually I find out that in one blog post, one time at the bottom, they put a link to the Discord that's meant to be where all the release note information goes. Like, if you acted like your own consumer for 30 seconds over the course of this entire development cycle, you would have seen how insane that is, and how you're going to have a hard time getting people to engage with it if you can't even find the community tab,
Oh yeah, no, you're not wrong. It reminds me of me going through and redoing my page, just having a terrible web page and presenting info bad is yeah. And I think that Unity needs to just be beyond that. They should be building some stuff. And I have another random thought before we take some more of these comments and stuff. I also think that Unity should start an app store or a game store, kind of like Steam or the Epic Store, but for indie games, and make it invite only. So they just invite a couple games, and then those games have to invite some other ones, do a really low percent, do like a 10% rev share, and make it kind of focused and featuring just indie games, and then have like a work in progress option for games that are not fully approved yet, but are at least tested virus free. And then one that's for games that are actually for sale that people can buy. That's just indie games, and then do some deployment stuff. They can make it pretty easy to go through that process to finish your game and deploy it up there. Do a couple exclusives or something with some indies to get them in on the ecosystem at first. But I think that it's a missed opportunity, and it's a good target, because none of, like, Epic's obviously great store, lots of options, and Steam too, but none of them are really targeted at like indie developers and new developers that are trying to get out there and focus their stuff, right? That are building a lot of things in Unity. It's the things that get focused and highlighted on the big AAA things, right? Or Fortnite, or the shit that's actually going to make a ton of money. And I feel like they could do something like that, for the indie community, have it grow, and then maybe eventually one day it turns into a Steam related thing. But
that's something that I said before, is that it's one of those, people can take it the wrong way, but this is what I 100% agree in terms of, I believe there should be more small walled gardens by that measure, right? There needs to be a place where people know there's a gatekeeper in the content. Whether or not I, as Unity, would want to do that, to me, that's a lot of anxiety in terms of how much people and work and management.
That's why I said invite only. You make it invite so that people have like whatever 2 invites they can share, and then you do the slow spread.
Definitely. I do think it would have to be very slow burn in terms of the value. But I would like it as a consumer, 100%. I do think we've at least gotten past the point where people have the old excuse of you can't make real games in Unity. Like, we have legitimately blockbuster, very big games in Unity now. But I think people still only trot out the same 4 or 5 examples, when realistically, there's a lot of games made in Unity. People don't realize there's Nintendo properties made in Unity, right? There's like legitimate games that are made in kind of Unity these days. So I think having some sort of more than just a vague presentation, but an actual place where you can go, this stuff has production quality, would be nice,
Yeah, no, I think that would be good. Just had like a production indie games shop. It's just for indie games. And like I said, later they could always convert it and turn it into something else. But yeah, Hearthstone was built in Unity. A lot of games, I think, a lot of those games, especially mobile stuff, is built in Unity, and there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for those games out there. But there's really no market, and I think that it's something that Unity could easily take over while it's still open and available. And obviously the indie games are going to want to get onto Steam and other things as well, but if they can pay a lower cut, and I think Unity could probably do that, then I think it would work. I mean, I don't know, maybe I don't know the economics of distribution at all though, and the costs are crazy, and I'm missing it, but I always got the sense that Steam was basically just printing money. So cool. Well, let's see. Do you need some more ideas, Jason, for videos?
Gladly, I can always take more. As we've been going, I've been writing down a few different things. People were mentioning editor tooling stuff, and there's a brief talk about AI types of stuff. I could talk about the different kinds of FSM versus, GOP or task planning algorithms, or just different options. So I've been writing as we go, different ideas.
You do one about particles in user interfaces?
No, I will. I'll wait till your iFinding makes a channel for that one.
I was your was going to be my next best hope. You're like a Luke Skywalker here. Okay, well, let's see. Any other ones? You triggered my Google branded wiretap. Sorry, Alexa. Didn't mean to do that. Did you see that they did a recent change on their Play Store stuff too, though, and they were going to start kicking out a bunch of apps?
No, I did get an email from them saying we're changing our policy, but I never looked into what
Yeah, exactly the policy was like, you have 2 months to do this thing or we're kicking out your apps. They're like trying to clean up the App Store, it seems. I don't remember exactly the details, but it seems like they're giving everybody a small amount of time and then trying to get rid of all the garbage, which I guess makes sense. It means that all my old apps are not going to go around because I don't even have the email address that I created the account for them on anymore. I think I let that domain expire. It was so old. It's the last time I did a Google Play account on my own.
I do think that that's what's the old saying, bolting the barn door after the horses, or closing the barn door after the horse is bolted, kind of thing. I think we're past the point. Like, yeah, I remember Unity did the same thing a while back, right? When they did the we're now migrating over from 5, and so anything made in 5 or prior needs an official update, or we're going to deprecate it. And so it is good to have a bit of a cleanup, because some of those things were there for years and then haven't been updated. So it makes sense. I don't think it's going to succeed at quote unquote cleaning it up. It just might. I think it's more internally, it'll give them less headaches in terms of having issues with products that don't work. I don't think it's going to affect the end user's experience as much. I think we're past that point.
Probably, yeah. It's just going to get rid of 50 to 90% of the data that's just sitting there wasted, unused. All the apps that nobody's ever downloading again get cleared out and stuff. But I think it'll be nice, at least. Speaking of new devices, I'm just curious. You still are not on the Apple headset, right?
It's one of the few I've never gotten. No.
I'm still 50-50. I feel like it's one of those things where there's definitely going to be like an early market opportunity to make something great or even something bad, release it, and then have it be a pretty big hit, at least initially. But I still haven't figured out what that thing is that's not terribly, terribly bad.
Yeah. Well, here's a little bit of a sneaky secret for people who do contract work. Oftentimes, whenever some new piece of hardware like this comes out, you'll inevitably get some client who'll be like, I want our product on that. At which case, it's like, why would you buy it yourself when you can wait till a client project comes along which requires it, and then either buy it with the funds for that project or get them to to partially compensate you for needing the equipment for their particular project. So I tend to usually wait for new hardware until a project comes along that requires that particular piece of hardware.
That makes sense. I could totally see that. And yeah, I think anybody looking to do projects, it's going to be an opportunity, something to get into. An idea, what was this one? Getting a computer vision stream into Unity to create a digital twin, then using Unity tools like nav mesh to control an RC car. Okay. Oh, speaking, there was a thing that came up earlier in the student call for the multiplayer mastery course. One of the questions was about building a VR game that's it's a VR game but with a mobile viewport, so a network setup so that you can view the game through some other device, or probably on big screens as well, right? Some that I'm sure you've done before, like a spectator mode. One of the options possible, or things questioned, was, is it possible to do that by passing just a render texture? So doing it all on the host, whatever, rendering the whole thing with the camera and then streaming that render texture versus just running a client. And then generally I'd recommend just run the client on the other device and make it actually networked. You're going to probably send a lot less data. But I was curious, have you done something like that where you just stream over video from the device instead, or from the host?
I'd never do it that way personally, because something that comes up a lot for client projects is you start out with having somebody in VR and you have somebody then watching on a desktop thing. At some point, someone's going to ask, can I see it this way? Can I turn off that visual? Can I look through that wall? Can I disable those things? Can I change the model that's in the way? Or they're moving their hands too fast. Can you add some easing so it looks smoother on the recording or whatever? And so it's infinitely easier every single time to, in fact, I don't even clone the same thing. Whenever I do a client view, it is literally a completely different Unity project, and it just happens to have the same network ID connection. And then from that point, I render the objects differently. In fact, I find that much easier too, because again, depends on what you're making. If it's a viewer, it can be much simpler, because what you can do as well is the VR version might need the fully qualified character with like the handle and the controller switcher and the grab and the physics throwers and whatever. The version in the viewer can just be a mirror script that literally tracks the position and replicates positions. And so I find that by building a second app, it's actually easier because you don't even need to replicate 3/4 of the features. The app is smaller, it's easier to manage, and you can do fun stuff like saying, here's how the colors render for this. Even though they're doing this in this scene, you're seeing the lightweight version, or you're seeing, or camera angles, or you can change different visual representations, or models and things. So yeah, I found it infinitely easier to just have two separate things and treat it like a data pipe and then visualize it whatever way the client wants separately.
I totally agree that was kind of the general consensus of the call too. Everybody was on board with that. And there was a comment here from Shadowed Souls about Sentis doing a post on a blog post about AI stuff, and then a bunch of things. I was curious, what is that something that you saw? Where is this blog post? I wonder if I can find it. Unity Sentis. Oh, come on. I swear this is the one thing that drives me nuts with Unity. Yeah. All the time. It's like every page I go to is a 404 or a or something else similar, and this is that was me clicking on the tags here. Like I clicked on the topics. I feel like their entire web setup is like I know they were doing like transitions or something, but it's it drives me nuts and makes it so difficult. It's the same with the documentation. Okay, well that link worked, but I don't know where the blog post is.
Honestly, even worse for me is I hate when you click on some link on the Unity website and you basically get a welcome to the marketing channel. Let's talk about all the great features. Like, yeah, can I actually see it or use it or do it? Am I just like, I'm already here, already using the engine. You can stop selling to me now, you know? It's like going. It's like going to the cashier. You're trying to buy something, and they're like, "Isn't this a great product?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I brought it to you. I want to use this now. Stop selling me the thing."
All right, so here's the blog. Let's see. This is not a site that I regularly look at. I'm gonna change that. Well, maybe not. The latest post is December 12th. I thought this was gonna be new stuff. I got excited.
I was, though, on that note. That's one of those things where I did myself a disservice. If you're like me, and you were put off by Unity's entire web nonsense for a long time, you might have written off a lot of their stuff because the documentation was subpar, it wasn't whatever. And because of that, I completely slept on Unity Learn for a very long time. I would say there was like a good 2 years. I was just like, oh, Unity are just bad at giving examples. I don't look at it. And it wasn't until a few people linked me some things. I'm like, oh, Unity Learn in particular has a lot of really good stuff. Like there's actual people have put some thought and attention into it. I admit it's a little bit long-winded in a lot of cases, and I think they have a audience problem where they treat every tutorial like it's for beginners, but then they're talking about like how to do ML, but they're also teaching you how to install a package. It's like, understand your audience. Like, stop giving me these stupid multi-tiered, pick one or the other. But the actual content tends to be at least a good introduction.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna have to dig through this. The Teach Unity, they have a certified instructor program. I didn't even know that was. I mean, I knew they had something. I didn't know they had it up on the page though. This is pretty cool. I have not dug into Unity Learn in a while. I'd really love to chat with the people that are working on it though and see what they're doing now. It's been a long time since I got to talk to anybody on there. Mostly my own fault though. That looks really cool though.
Yeah, well, they also they briefly tried to make it a subscription private thing, and then I think they backed that out and realized no, if you want people to use it, it's going to have to be a public resource.
Yeah, I feel like that needs to be there. People will sign up for Pro later and grab stuff off the asset store. You got to teach them how to use it for free. Nice. While I got this popped up, I'm gonna quickly share the new format part that I put together for the mastery course. So this is for the second module. The first module, the client hosted one, peer-to-peer stuff's already all available, and then go grab it. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on my new layout. Oh, does it fit? Let me drag it a little bit. I don't really like it too much? Oh, where'd it go? Yeah. Okay. Whatever. It's gonna squish down. Normally they're side by side, but I can't get it to set up there. But yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the new layout. So I got the info here about it, and then the lessons. I actually tried to put in some info about what we're doing, and I still feel like the formatting's terrible. I wish I was a fucking web designer. If I was a web designer or an artist, I could make such a better landing page that showed off kind of all the stuff. But
I will say I was lucky in that, because when I remember I got hired for a job and I thought I was hired. I literally applied to a job that says C# developer. And I got bamboozled as I got the job, and then they had me working in JavaScript, and it's like that's literally not what you hired me for. But as I sat at the desk, they bamboozled me. But as angry as I was for a while and debated quitting, that parlayed into a couple of other jobs later, and I found my.
Where'd you go? What happened? Did I lose the internet or did I lose Storey? Uh-oh. Oh, I seem like I still have internet. I just don't see Storey. Okay. Wasn't sure. I was sitting here like if it's just me or just him. Okay. He'll be back in a second, I guess. I'll give him a minute. I was pretty sure it was going to be me. Ireland exploded. Oh, shit. I hope that's not the case. Hopefully everything's okay. There we go. Cool. He's back. There you are. Whew. Ireland did not explode. It was a lie. Oh, you're silent though. Ireland just got silenced.
Are we back? Okay.
There you are.
Yeah. Internet kills me. But yeah, I
you're really good at sitting still.
Yeah. I was thinking you're very attentive to what I'm saying here. I was just saying that worked in web, and I got a chance to learn all that stuff in a way that I wouldn't have ever chosen myself, and that was a useful avenue that I was kind of forced into.
Nice. Yeah, I never got good at it. I learned the formatting and the tools and all that stuff and could make a web page, but I would always just send it over to a designer to make it pretty afterwards because I couldn't do it. But
the trick for me was, did you ever use Bootstrap or any of the other 12-point grid systems? One of the things I learned early in my career, like absolutely game changer, is there's a bunch of websites like Wrap Bootstrap, which will let you buy fully built web pages, which are made up of templates. Other people have just used JavaScript packages that exist. They didn't make them all themselves, but for like $12 to $40, kind of like a Unity asset, right? You're buying a full web page with all of the plumbing, all of the imports at the top, all of the, well, technically imports should be at the bottom. It's a whole different conversation. But basically, the general structure of the web page is correct, and it works. And so from that, when I was learning, it was really cool looking at a good web page that was like aesthetic and clean, and then being able to rip it apart because it's made out of modular Bootstrap pieces. So that certainly helped a lot for me learning.
Well, you've convinced me that I should just find a good theme and use that.
Honestly, that's what I would do.
That's what I need to do. Yeah, because think about it. That's literally what I should be doing, and I don't know why I did, but I did make my. Here, let me drag it out. You can see the beautiful version in where's it at? Up here, like that one. Oh, come on, how do I do this?
It's funny how you do enough web stuff. I can literally see almost the invisible grid squares. That's a 6. So for people who don't know, most websites are built on a 12 column model. And then what you do is you divide them up into subsections. So this side by side is actually a 6 and a 6. And then as you shrink it down, it'll snap and move one 6 underneath the other 6. And then and you start to see each one of those size changes relative to there's media tags that can tell you what the resolution types of your screen are and stuff.
Yeah, I almost miss web development stuff, but not that much. Anyway, if anybody wants to check it out, the whole page is right up there. I will link it in the chat real quick. I'm sure it's in the description too. You can go check it out and see the lessons and what's actually on there. Go see my amazingly terrible web design. I am a terrible artist. Programming I'm good at. Coding is easy. Making things pretty is the opposite of easy, in my opinion. Storey, you're much better at making things pretty than I am. That's for
Well,
damn sure.
I will admit that I mostly cheat. I'm actually really bad at actually doing it. I'm just good at finding references, and I've watched enough tutorials from smart people that I will often pull something up side by side, copy what they did, and change some colors. So it's more, I understand the mechanics enough to know what to steal correctly. That's the way I would put it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it, though. So there's another question here from Jason, or a video idea. Sorry, how to be considered a senior game developer or a senior developer in general. I think I've done a video about this somewhat recently, but I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that one too.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do think that whole area of the 10x dev, the senior dev, all of the like buzz terms and stuff might be a good, just broad topic. Because another thing we've talked about this before, is it's kind of funny. You do this stuff even for a year, and you'll get a very good sense of that there's actually 50 jobs involved and what the point of a concept art is versus the levels, all this kind of stuff. But I actually remember being in college and just reading the list of game dev jobs and feeling like absolutely scared at the, like, I don't understand. You've just given me 50 words. They all sound vaguely similar. What is a product owner versus a project manager versus a game designer versus a, like levels, all of these different things are like, I don't understand. Like tool developer, why are these individual things separate? And that alone is a good video. I know you've done stuff like that briefly in the past, but I think covering the like the gobbledygook of all of the nonsense terms might be a nice one as well.
Oh, I think it would be a really good one. There was another question here. I was trying to find the video for the podcast for it, but you're wondering about how you navigate being underpaid by clients, not having the confidence to increase rates. And the number one thing that stood out for me was always just giving them rate options, because then you can have the higher priced rate that you think is good with all of the bells and whistles and stuff. And then you can have a lower priced one where you just start to cut some of that stuff out and then show them what they can get at at the prices that you think that they're going to come in at, and then what's available at the other option. Doing a 3-tiered pricing model has always worked well for me. There was a really good podcast about it, but I don't know if I can find it or not. It was on .NET Rocks. You got thoughts though?
Oh, I've struggled with this one my whole career, and I would say that the thing that helped me a lot was I used to think, is this task worth this much money? Do I feel like it's fair for me to charge X amount? And that is 1000% the wrong way to think about that particular problem. The way I look at it now is I was saying that to myself because I didn't want to be, I wanted to have a good working relationship, and I wanted the person to leave happy. And to do that, I want to feel like they weren't scammed. That was my original reasoning. But what I came to the conclusion of is if I do it, if I have a price that's too low, I will resent them. And I will be working the job that I will hate. I will hate them unjustly because they agreed to a fair price. And then I will end up probably doing worse work than I would have done. So if I actually care about the consumer's end product, the minimum bar I have to hit is the amount I'd be willing to do the job for. And so at a baseline, I will never do a job now that will make me feel uncomfortable that I'm being underpaid. I would rather walk away and have a good relationship there than take the job and hate them for it or burn a bridge or something as a result. So that at least sets a minimum bar. The question then becomes, how do you raise that internal minimum bar? Because most devs don't feel like they're worth that much because it's like, to me, this is easy. So by rights, why would I charge more for it? And that just becomes one of two things. Either have other people validate your worth. In other words, do enough projects that eventually over time, your rates just, if you only increase by a small amount each time, enough projects, that goes up. Or the second one is understanding how to charge by value, which is sort of look at your client, ask why they're doing it, ask how much money they intend to make from it or what their goals are, and then measure your worth to the project by a percentage. And if you are literally making the thing, because that's what programmers tend to be doing, it suddenly becomes a lot easier to judge your worth as 30% of a project, which is often a lot higher than you were going to charge. Because once you see it as, if you try to charge by hour, that's foolish. That's not how, because developers will think of their time as like well, I sat and thought about it for a day, and then I typed for an hour, so I'll charge for an hour. It's like, that's not sustainable for
What do you mean
you.
that's 9 hours? What are you talking
Yeah.
about?
So it's I used to do that a lot too, where I would like measure my time sitting at my desk, not realizing that this project has consumed my life for the last month, and I have to be fair to myself of how much of my energy and resources and stuff, because most programmers don't spend all their time typing. So again, don't
Very, very
wait by
tiny
time.
percent.
Don't wait by time. Wait by your investment to the project.
And my wife always is like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm working." She's like, "No, you're not. You're just sitting there." Like, I'm thinking. That's the job. Or like walking around in circles. Like, I'm working. I'm trying. Like, yeah, it's very, very little of it is. I feel like as you do more and more development, less of it ends up being typing, and more of it is just like thinking like, what's the perfect line of code to type? Or like, what's the perfect method in class to solve this problem without turning it into a mess and making it a pain later.
And this is the thing too. Like, this is actually a really interesting topic. I just want to like drill down a bit here.
Yeah.
Because internally, like, not gonna lie, I would say that and I wouldn't even believe it. I'd be like, that's just cope. I'm just telling myself that for an excuse for me sitting here not doing work. That's what I'm really doing. But over time, that pivoted, because the truth is, if you were a junior dev, you are going to try to solve every problem, which means you're going to spend 3 weeks writing code furiously to create a poor implementation of something. If you are a senior dev, you will sit for a half a day, you will research the options, you will buy or download a preset pack that does the majority of what you need. You will have a starting point that makes the client happier because it does more of the features that they would want out of the box. And you will spend more of your time learning to tweak and use it. And it's less stressful for you than rewriting it from scratch and having to deal with bugs on a feature system that wasn't the point of the original project. So that whole argument of like the 10x dev or whatever is, that shoots you in the foot, because the smarter you are at doing your work, the more you're attuned to the client's end results, the less time you spend developing and the less value you feel like you've added to the project, and the less you want to give yourself as a reward. But the fact of the matter is, if you measure it through the lens of, I hire someone to do a job and they disappear for 3 weeks and give me a half-written, broken, buggy solution, versus I hire someone to do a job, they come back to me a day and a half later with a rough prototype that works. I don't care if they wrote it all from scratch or if they made something or used something that made my task work. And so if you look at it value add first, your entire perspective changes and you end up being a lot happier with both your quality of work and the end result. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but that is where the whole 10x dev myth issue comes from. It's not they type 10 times faster. It's not they write 10 times more code. It's that they use their time so much more effectively that more results arrive in the same time period because they value things better relative to the end result.
Yeah, and I typically end up writing less code. Right, that's kind of the goal, and it's one of my favorite things too, is just getting rid of code and having less and less code. When people tell me that they wrote tons and tons of lines of code and added all these classes, I just get scared, because it just means that they probably made a mess of things and made things way overcomplicated. It's something I used to do. I mean, when I was a junior developer, I feel like I used to do that all the time. Like, look at all this code I wrote. It does all kinds of stuff. And most of the time it could be simplified, shrunk down, or just completely deleted because it wasn't actually needed.
And that and automation stuff too, right? Like the difference between
Yes.
I right click, create scriptable object type value, right click, create scriptable object type value, multiply that times 100 items in inventory, versus I wrote a little editor button that I press button and it makes it for me, or I wrote them all in an XML sheet and I pressed a button and it exported it and generated all the scriptable objects for me. It scales and scales to the point that you lose a lot less grunt work time.
Yeah. And I feel like that differentiation between the senior and junior level is knowing when and to do all those things, like to automate away your problems, and to be able to, I mean, in general, my like high level description for senior developer is that you can give them a task and they can go off, do it, and come back with a good working result, without much hand holding or without much guidance. So on a new project, obviously, you know, guide them on stuff on the way things are done on the project if it's been around for a while. But in general, that's kind of the difference. A junior developer is expected to need help, need assistance and direction along the way, and kind of intermediate level developers kind of in between. Some tasks they can knock out easily on their own. The more complicated ones and the lower level stuff, they're usually still kind of figuring out and learning.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Bill Gates from years ago when he said, "Lazy people make the best developers because you give them a task they don't want to do, they will find the most efficient way to get it done that is the least amount of effort possible because they don't want to do it." And so if you have enough people thinking that way, you'll get a lot of stuff done very fast.
Yeah, I totally agree. Oh, did we lose Storey again? Oh no, you just froze for a second. Before we continue, I got to go in just a few minutes, but I wanted to tell everybody to like and subscribe because we only have 24 likes. It's not very many likes. But I wanted to take this question, maybe a couple other ones real quick. So somebody was asking here. Oh, I like the elephant. Do you guys use a DI framework, a service locator, or MVP in your projects? And do you think these are good for Unity projects? I personally do not. It depends. Some projects, if the project's already there and it's using any one of them, I just go ahead and use it. But by default, if I'm creating a new project on my own, it's not something. None of those are patterns that I typically shove into my games anymore. I used to all the time. All three of them and a couple others. Tried them all, and I just ended up pretty much ripping them all out, and I don't use them. But I assume you might use some sometimes in some of these scenarios.
Yeah, I've yo-yoed on these so many times. But back in my infallible code days, I used to say don't use them at all because it's too complicated. You can get away with much simpler solutions most of the time. Then I started working on client projects with someone I work with very closely a lot. And we started using it, and it was amazing because they could work on art and processing stuff and visuals, and I could just inject new services in real time, and it would never impacted their work, and it was really efficient and awesome. Then I worked on a bigger project with a whole lot of new people, and very few of them knew how to use dependency injection. And so I ended up, quite frankly, making the project far more complicated than it needed to be because I did it the way I would do it, and most people weren't used to engaging that way, and I regret the process. And so the full cycle is I've realized I like doing it, but I don't think it's practical most of the time. And I don't think it's something you want to do unless you're very familiar with it and you're working with other people doing it. So dependency injection, I don't anymore. I certainly don't use things like Zenject because it's like if I had 5 people, developers in a project, and you had a month to go learn Zenject together, you could then use it very efficiently in your project. If not everybody knows how to use it, do not use it. That's my
you don't want to spend the entire first 6 months just trying to explain to everybody why it doesn't work again because they didn't do the right thing and they need to learn the right method. Yeah.
And it just also means that when something goes wrong, someone has to knock on the door of the person who knows the system, and all of a sudden the whole project screeches to a halt.
Yes.
I'd even broadly say that about using assembly definitions. I've realized that can be a real killer if you haven't sat and made sure everybody knows not just how to make an assembly definition, what they are, how they work, and how they reference each other, because it's just been such a nightmare dealing with that. So I actually wouldn't even use those in projects unless I know the people I'm working with. So that's
and I would only use them when you need to because you want to split out what you're actually shipping and delivering. Assembly definitions, for anybody who doesn't know, they'll let you take a chunk or a folder of code and then make that be in a single file or single assembly, and then you can split that out so that if you have code that's like server only or whatever you don't want going out, or special tools or other stuff, you can split that out. Or if you have a very big project, if you have a large project, it can help with quite a few things, compilation speeds and well, mostly compilation speeds are really the main thing it'll help with.
I would say on the service locator, I would say that's probably the most complicated 90% of people should ever really get. Even a medium-sized game can live perfectly comfortably off a service locator. I don't think it's the ideal pattern, but I think it's the perfect level of it's not too complicated. Most people understand how it works, and you can use it for most projects. My personal preference is actually not to use that at all. I tend to favor creating a game manager, making a prefab out of it, instantiating it once as not a singleton in the classic code sense, but a singleton as in it is instantiated once at the start of the application.
Right. It's a single thing. It doesn't need to enforce it because you're not ever going to do something stupid and run your game startup twice.
Exactly. It's literally like the first lines of code ran. And then rather than having a quote unquote service locator officially, I prefer to hard code have a game manager, have sub-services to that, have things bound up. And if there's things that need to be serviced in some capacity, I would create event buses and event things, and I would subscribe and send messages, and they'll all internally talk to each other. And then if something does need to be accessed elsewhere, I will give it the reference it needs. I think passing a service locator leads to more issues with it's basically your kernel root, and it's a whole big thing. So basically I just use a prefab, as funny as it sounds, as my main solution for that.
I also do the same. I feel like most of the time the service locator is just kind of obfuscating and complicating the process of me going to get a static reference to a thing that there's only ever one of, and that there's always only one of. There's always one. It's always in memory, and I don't need anything complicated for it. Just direct static memory access to it is the fastest and usually the simplest. I mean,
although two caveats I would add. One is a lot of people will directly reference their manager with a singleton instance of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And that can work, but what you get to, here's my litmus test for whether or not you're going to give yourself headaches later. Can you make a new empty scene, drop an object in and press play, and there's no errors? It doesn't matter if it doesn't quote unquote work as expected, if it doesn't have all of the pieces required, but does it blow up? And if it doesn't blow up, you're probably fine. It just means that you need to configure something. Ideally, you'd write some console log warnings to say this needs these things and then turns itself off if it can't have the things it needs. But if you have systems that literally you can't test, like I've seen games where you drag the character controller into an empty scene and put it on a flat plane, and it throws an error because it doesn't have the platform surface manager, which detects normals for ground planes, which it needs for sound effects. And then you drag that in. It's like that throws an error because that needs the entity and enemy manager to deal with the things for the sound effects.
It is like global manager objects just sitting there.
And so by the end of it, you've rebuilt the game with the empty scene just to even press play, and that's infuriating. That'll cause you headaches. So I use the null object pattern for any time I have a service injection where it's not been provided. So basically things will work. They just won't have the correct implementation unless it's been provided by something else. That tends to be my solution.
Yeah, and I do typically stuff pretty similar to have like a game manager that will have references to all of those other systems. And most of the time those other systems are either just prefab sitting in the prefab folder if they need to have references to stuff, or just non-mono behavior classes that are just sitting there getting instantiated to deal with stuff. And they also, I'd say, very rarely get accessed. So those are things like you want to access them on rare occasions, but most of the time the dependencies for things are just kind of injected into stuff that's going to need them. So if I know a component's going to need access to something, that gets pushed in and bound right away, and not stored as like an extra copy to the manager, but it could be whatever the bit of data is from there, and then the managers tend to store a tiny bit of data and then have a little bit of a public, have them with a very small public interface. In my experience, I don't like having a manager that's got a whole bunch of stuff on it. It does too many things. It gets really confusing.
Yeah, I've tried that before.
How it works. 4 or 5 methods is good.
And to answer the Bull's comment there about singletons, I guess the way I would put it is a lot of people misunderstand what singleton means, in my opinion. When people hear the word singleton, it's like saying something is packed or organized, right? And if I said to you, oh, I've packed this away, then you could mean that to say I put it away somewhere, or you could say I put it in this particular box. And when a lot of people hear singleton, they mean I used this branded box to put a certain shape in my thing and organize it a certain way. The fact of the matter is, singleton is not a line of code. It is a philosophy. It is an idea that a script has one instance. It is not the word singleton. It is not the word static. It is not public static. It is not a do not destroy unload. These are all arbitrary implementations. The easiest way to do it is by having a single static instance on a script, especially if you're outside of Unity. If you are inside of Unity,
Unity has an entire cycle of life cycles. And so there's loads of ways to create a singleton by loading a scene where there's only one thing in it, or creating a prefab before the game starts. Singleton doesn't mean I use the word singleton. It means there is a general philosophy in my application that this thing only exists once. And I will do as much guardrailing as needed to ensure that fact is true for the duration of the life cycle of my application. So when I say singleton, what I mean is this thing, the enemy, needs access to the score system so that it can register itself for events or something when it dies, or when it whatever, or when it needs reference to the loot table manager to request what loot to drop when it dies, whatever connection there is. And when I say singleton, I've died again, haven't I?
No, I think it's me.
Okay, because you're frozen.
I'm frozen. My video just randomly froze. I can see myself just sitting there looking weird. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. That's strange.
So what I mean is, I would design code such that it requires a loot manager, and I would have an interface called loot manager, and I would have a single class called no loot manager, which is the default implementation that's provided. So when I instantiate the object, it is currently not connected to a loot manager. It entirely works, but the loot portion just fails to do anything. And then when I say singleton, what I mean is, if I do want a loot manager, a quote unquote real one that's at a manager application level, I will put it somewhere, whether it's in the prefab in the scene, whether it's a singleton static instance, whether it's a wherever. And then when there is one, at some point, I will call set manager and I will assign that manager to that thing. So singleton doesn't mean I write the word thing.instance in the code. It means philosophically, this talks to one thing and I can get that thing from some place. And the difference, I think, is the idea of this thing called a composition root. And that tends to be where most people think of inversion of control and dependency injection, which is the difference between, do I use the object myself or does someone give me the object? So you can have a singleton high score manager, but there's a fundamental difference between me internally knowing what the high score manager is and saying Steam integration high score manager .instance .do thing versus my high score manager, whatever I've been given .do thing, and someone else says, oh, by the way, everyone who needs a high score manager, we're using this one. It's the same principle. It's still the same singleton, but there's a huge difference between I know before the game even starts which exact one we're using versus I philosophically use one and somebody somewhere in the application decides on that one, makes that one, and then gives everybody that one. It results in arguably the same thing, but it means when that line of code changes, it changes in the composition root once. It doesn't change in every single instance in every single place in the entire application. So when I say I avoid singleton in that case, I'm not avoiding singleton, the line of code. I'm avoiding hard coding a reference internally from one script to an exact implementation. And I instead have one script talk to a concept, and I have another script decide on implementation and then populate that concept throughout the application so that they're two separate problems.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a kind of a good way to go. I don't do that. I just hard code my references directly, and I just don't call them from things very often. So external classes.
Yeah, I will say, like, for the first 2 months of a project's life, I will do that, by the way. And I say this all the time. This isn't like where you start. And having watched your courses myself, you do the same thing. Like, you literally, you start with, we'll just write it in line, to, well, now it's in the way, to now it's too complicated, and you extract it out. I always go to the end result because that's what people are really asking about. But the truth is, you do it in steps. You increment as needed.
Exactly. I just kind of add the complexity as needed. Like, I try to avoid adding an abstraction until I have a second use. Like, until I'm actually going to push stuff in. The problem that I ran into is that there's so many times where well, with enterprise stuff especially, it gets so easy to add abstractions for other people to use, and often other people would actually use them. Other teams would implement interfaces and use them and add stuff to things all the time. It was pretty common when I was working in enterprise stuff. With games, it never happens. It's always just like you're working on it. You're not passing stuff off to another team. So yeah, exactly what Uri said. you don't need to. You mean I don't need to account for infinite complexity before I even wrote the first piece of my game? No, exactly. So I avoid adding any extra complexity until I get to the point where I need it. I know you're talking about like the end parts where you actually need it on those projects, but
well, a good example
in general,
of this,
just go ahead.
Like I was gonna say, let's take the concept of contracts and interfaces. One of the most common one that I know I'll need throughout my entire application at some point is a command pattern. I don't think I've ever worked on a single project where I haven't at some point put in a command pattern, or more specifically, an I command interface with an execute function. That is the most bargain basement. Everyone uses it in every single application somewhere, some variation of a command pattern thing. They might rebrand one or two parts, but functionally they have some kind of commands. Everything executes something somewhere. And the question comes, would I make that at the start? The answer is no, because I don't need it yet right now. I will 100% need it at some point. But the philosophy isn't to make a contract. It's not to make every single method that may execute implement I command. It's to understand that, okay, I'm going to have a terminal or a input thing somewhere. So what'll happen is, most likely, I'll make a project. I'll have a bunch of mechanics and features. I will then decide I want a terminal. I will then decide I want to register certain actions to the terminal. And so I will either make a Unity attribute that I can slap on top of methods that are relevant, or I will make some kind of reflective grabber script that will iterate services, or I will make a service register where every individual script can register with that functions that it wants to call. And once I have a list of actions, I will iterate those, use a command pattern, and build a terminal that I can then execute with various names and commands and run things. So that is like the simplest interface, and also the example of one where you could just get away with dropping it in at the start. But even that's not necessary unless it solves a problem. And the problem is, at some point, I want a terminal. And then you can go further with this with the classic file menu at the top. Unity does this. That's what the context menu icon is. It's a command pattern. You are attributing something as commands. And same with doing things like having, and again, that scales later. Right now, I just need commands to execute. But later on, I might need a validate function, which says this command can't run because the certain conditions aren't met. But I'm not going to make that now because I don't need it yet. So each of these things will eventually grow, but there's no need to start there with the complexities of it. So yeah, interfaces is a big one because I've gone both sides. I've built projects where like everything had 50 interfaces with I colorable, I set text, I have percentages. And sometimes those make sense, but I've learned the value is not to start there, because you can arguably come up with a reason why anything could be extractable to an interface.
It could be reused by something in the future.
Yeah. And then the worst part is when you finally decide to use it and you're like, this is so granular, I hate using it.
Yeah, or like I need to change this. This interface doesn't actually work for what I want. So now we got to change it.
Yeah, and that's why like I was debating actually doing this, because I think the command pattern is like the gateway drug to a lot of complexity, because it's one of those things that I think people don't understand how smart it is. The reason it's so powerful is because it's so stupid. Like a common example, I see so many people make a command pattern where they have like 4 different command patterns with different variables inside of the argument. So execute on a mono behavior, execute on a transform, execute on a player. They make different commands that act on certain actors, which defeats the point of a command pattern. The entire point of a command pattern is to decouple the use from the execution. And if you do that, you end up screwing yourself later, because it now, when you get to that point, oh, I want to use this command here. Oh, but I can't because the contract is different and I have to change the contract, and so on and so on. The most powerful part of the command pattern is the fact that if you want parameters, you have to inject them in the constructor. That's the point. You should construct a new one and execute it with an execute function. And by doing that, it has infinite flexibility. So the command pattern, I think, makes you realize the difference between using the method contract or using the constructor contract. Which implementation is where does the data go? And if you understand that, you're like, oh, well, that's where the power of this comes from. So yeah, I think I could probably do like 2 hours just talking about the command pattern, because I think if you truly understand the difference between why putting your variables in the constructor versus putting them in the parameters for the execute function is like night and day difference, then that will inform every other design pattern, why it's designed the way it is.
Yeah, I think that would be a good, especially if you did a couple examples that were more gameplay examples showing command pattern stuff too. I think that would be fun and interesting. I know it kind of like limits the type of games there, but it might be nice just toss in, sprinkle in a couple, like here's a little example of how you would use this for this mechanic and this mechanic. I think people could, because then once you understand the pattern, you can start to see it in the scenarios, and I think it clicks a bit. Happy New Year. There's a comment here in the comments. So happy New Year to everybody. If it is 2024, right? Yep, still the right year.
Yeah,
by the way, I was going to mention there was one Game Shenanigans has been hanging out who is a channel member, and I just recently started doing early videos for channel members and Patreon supporters. So it's on both of them. They're just getting access to videos at least a couple hours early for most of them. Some of them probably a day. As I start to build up and get faster and faster at them, they'll be a little bit further out. But if anybody wants access to those, feel free to do the membership thingy. I just want to call out Game Shenanigans too for being a member. Anyway, what's up?
I hope this year, because I have a Ko-fi thing that I don't really do much with. Basically, as we know, it's a glorified gate that gets you into the Discord. I would like to have actual value on the Ko-fi itself, and so I aim to do the same thing. I'm hoping to maybe have a lead time on videos there as well.
Nice. Yeah, go check that out. If you haven't signed up for that too, it's just, what is it, like $1 or $5 or whatever, get access to the Discord.
Yeah, whatever
server.
The default thing is, yeah.
And it's a one-time thing. It's not a recurring fee or anything like that. So definitely we're checking out. And while we're checking things out, don't forget to check out the multiplayer mastery course. It still says next lesson Monday. It's Friday, recording it tomorrow. We're going to be getting into the first lesson on the dedicated server part is character creation. So creating a character from the client, passing that all up through cloud code and the cloud save system, so that in the next lesson, when you log into a server, the server can pull down your character and you control them and take over different characters, pop back in and all that, and then continue on through the rest of the game. But that's the first lesson for that part that's coming up this Friday. It should be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about it. I've been working like 14, 16 hours a day on it, just nonstop, getting this as perfect as possible and deleting as much code as possible. That's like my favorite part. Like, okay, nope, can delete that. Anything I can do to simplify and make the lessons and the code as presentable and easy to understand as possible so people can use it, but also in exactly the way that I would build it. So I try to build everything out like the way that I would put it into a production environment where it's fast and easy to maintain and upgrade. So,
which actually I think brings up a good point. Because I'm curious, because I say curious, but actually again I've seen your courses, so I know you do this. I'm sure I want to hear your thoughts though. One of the comments inexperienced dev said was, "Do you find the backtracking to add the abstractions takes up more time?" Well, this is what I find interesting, because again, Jason does this in the courses, and it's something that I do as well myself. If you put the calculation up front, you're like, oh, well, I could save time by making everything contracts and interfaces and stuff later. What you're doing is you're doing work where you can't point to what features have been added to the project as a result. Now, you could argue that, okay, when the time comes and I do this, it'll be faster. But look at it a different way. I write code. Let's, again, take the course. I write code that like spawns a bunch of things and makes like different outfits, swap clothes, and does different stuff. It's not the way I want to do it, but I've added value. The project is now better for it. It has new features. Then later on, I want a feature to be able to control that with a terminal or commands. And so if I go back and I change that and I delete old code, I'm still adding more features. So it's not backtracking. If you treat it like backtracking in terms of, oh, I'm rewriting or deleting old stuff and I'm wasting effort, you're kind of missing the point. The point is it should always be improving in a direction. And so writing it once makes it work. Writing it again makes it work better, faster, or easier to maintain, which means writing new features is easier the next time. So I was going to say, I want your thoughts on that, because again, a lot of people might be confused when they see you effectively sometimes rewrite the same thing 2 or 3 times over the course of a course. But like, we both know it's the right way to do it. I want to hear your kind of talk on that a bit.
Oh yeah, I think it's one of the most important skills when it comes to writing software. Like writing new stuff in an empty application is the easiest thing you can do. You got like a blank slate, and everybody loves the new greenfield project. You're like, oh yeah, there's no restrictions, no requirements. I think the most important thing you can learn how to do is like constantly improve your code. So you look for the time when you're adding the new feature, figure out how the feature could fit into what you have existing and what that would look like as a refactor. And then you have to determine, essentially how you want to fit that new feature in. Is it going to be a large change to existing code? Is it going to be a big chunk of new code, or is it going to be a minor change to an existing system? And typically what you'll find is that it's usually a relatively minor change to a system that you're adding that feels like a big change because you're hitting a bunch of spots, but you're really just doing Control R, that rename, refactor, and doing a little bit of extraction for maybe 5 or 10 different parts, but it's hitting, maybe it's hitting 100 different places in your code. So it looks like a big change in source control, but the actual logical change is usually pretty small. It could be anything from just like replacing a parameter with an interface, or making some method that returns one thing suddenly be generic, and now it returns multiple things. Stuff like that. Or, for instance, one of the things to do in the course is adding a stat system. So start with items, and pick up items. They don't really do anything at the beginning, but you can pick them up, manage them, move them around, and all that. Add in abilities so you can do damage and kill players and all that with a single stat, and then add in stats, and then you can tie in those stats to inventory items and abilities. And with those systems already there, it becomes really obvious and apparent where and how you would hook those up. If you start putting in all of these things like, okay, abilities need these 20 stats, so I'm going to write all of these stats and not know how I'm going to hook them up later, it doesn't save you any time, and it feels a lot like doing busy work that's not that's going to need to get changed out later. So I always recommend do it when you're ready to hook the thing up. Like when you're ready to actually do the implementation, start putting it in there, and try not to stub out too much stuff. I've done that in the past, where stubbed out all kinds of stuff. You feel great. You feel like, oh, I look at all this stuff I accomplished. I made like a dozen interfaces and hundreds of methods. None of it does anything or actually works. And you're going to have to refactor and change almost all of it because you're making way too many assumptions at the beginning. So unless you know exactly what you're building, sometimes you're just rebuilding something that you've built 100 times and you know exactly how it's going to be. Adding stuff early, it's always been a negative for me.
I will frequently, and I think this is a massively undervalued skill, I will print a log message in 90% of places over the course of the... I say this all the time. If you ask me to make a shooting character for a game jam top-down thing, the first line of code I'm going to write is if spacebar pressed, print pew pew.
Yeah,
that'll be my first.
Bang. Yeah. Move around and print pew, or do a raycast and tell me what you hit. So it's going to be something simple. It's not going to be the full thing.
And when you get to stats, I will have a on character died, print character died. And then later on, when I get to the stat system, I will probably start with a singleton, and I will send a message, and I will have a single print message that says character died named X on stat system. And then later on, when I decide to hook it up to the numbers, I will say stat number was this, and I'll print this plus this equals new this number. And I will evolve the system out by just printing out the messages. So yeah, it's the example, again, to go back to what inexperienced developer said, is I hear this question a lot. I find difficulty in maintaining decoupled systems that speak to each other sort of least complicated way possible. Well, here's the thing. You know the least complicated way possible. If I was to ask you, I have A, I have B, what's the least complicated way to communicate the two things? You'll know the answer. But then you'll be like, yeah, but that's not, what if I want, and there's your problem. You've already you know the answer.
The what ifs.
Yeah, but you're not going to do it because you're like, well, hypothetically, in this, how about you just write that thing now, and then you pick a new thing. And when that new thing conflicts with the old thing, you now have a new problem. Now you pause. Now you put new problem up on screen, and you figure out how you connect A and B in the simplest thing. So the answer isn't you don't pick the simplest thing for all scenarios. You pick what is the simplest now. Okay, I've now changed the domain of the problem. What is the simplest now? And the simplest will keep getting more complicated because the concept gets more complicated, but you always know the simplest answer. You just don't want to do it because you don't feel like it'll be perfect the first time, but it won't be perfect the first time. So make it good enough and keep incrementing until good. And then the reason why that's so powerful is when you're done, you won't have that awkward moment of, oh, I hate this code. I don't know why I wrote it. It doesn't really work the way I want to, because every line of code had to solve a problem. So even when you look at messy code, you're like, I hate that code. Yeah, but it's needed for this. It's not vestigial. It's not excess. It literally solves a problem. It doesn't solve it the best way, but it solves the problem. So the answer is now not how do I arbitrarily solve hypothetical problems, is how do I refactor this working code into something a bit nicer? And that's a much more grounded problem. Can I make this a bit nicer? Can I make this a bit nicer? Can I make this a bit nicer?
And it still works, right? It works from the beginning. You know that it works, and you're just like, okay, does it still do the same thing after the refactor? Yes.
Like, very simple. If I was to say I wanted to make a Factorio style game, it's like, okay, what is the interface for a single machine in Factorio? You could spend a year of your life hypothetically guessing about every possible connection and interface and socket and freak yourself out. Or you can just write a box that goes boop every 10 seconds. and then next stack another box beside it. And then say, when this boops, find neighboring box, pass boop to that box. And you can work your way to an answer. And you'll end up with a very complicated, multifaceted system. But you didn't guess. You solved problems until
and then you go, damn, I need to switch this to dots because there's way too many entities for my multifaceted system. Did you see the comment here? College makes it hard to write messy code. I've met some college graduates who I would probably disagree. I don't know.
My secret to that is, when it comes to college, code can be as messy as you like, as long as it's behind an interface boundary. So to go back to what I said before about the command pattern, I worked on a system in college where we had to basically recreate a poor man's version of Photoshop. We had to implement each of the photo manipulation processes for edge detection and for sepia and whatever. And it's all pretty simple. It's just get an array of pixels, do various different nearest neighbor calculations and blah, blah, blah. And that code is a mess. Absolute complicated mess, because you have to do a lot of like pixel navigation and whatever. But when it was done, I had a function called do sepia or do edge detection, and it took in 3 variables. And then I made an interface called apply image effect, which took in an image effect, applied the image effect. So the code is really messy that actually does the work. But the end result is I made a nice UI with a drop down that had a bunch of image effects. You would click one, it would apply it. And it even had an undo function, because all I would do is have the negative function for the approach. So even though my code did the same as everyone else's, I had a lot more features and it looked a lot fancier, looked a lot cleaner. But I used, so I can admit it now, I actually took the code from the year prior, because I knew a guy who did the course the year before me, and I took all of his code. So I spent my time doing the nice UI stuff, and I just took the algorithms from his stuff, because that's the smart thing. I didn't want to have to reinvent the algorithms myself.
Yeah, but, you shouldn't. It's already been solved. It's sinister. So that at their college home, they always read the code and critiqued variable names. That is not the norm from what I've seen. Maybe some teachers do, but a lot of college grads have seen write variables named A1, A2, A3, and so. I'm not saying that's a college specific thing, but they definitely don't always teach you to do it good. So it's good. Like, it seems like you might have gone to a good place.
Well, also, like, again, this could purely be a personality thing or a approach. I think I mentioned my course had like a 92 or 95% dropout rate. So a lot of people didn't really gel with coding. And there's I tutored a lot of people years below and above me. And the general idea is that even with code variables and names and things, if you can justify it, most scholars are fine. If you can explain why you did it. So my long story short, the reason why they critique your variable names is because you're probably just writing them without thinking. I have colleagues. I know a guy who literally is a rocket scientist, and he wrote his object. He had something called like shop object. He wrote the word object into the shop name, and I laughed at him and I memed on him for it as a result, because he didn't write it with like some grand design in mind. He just wrote, oh, that's a shop object. Now, object is a redundant, pointless word, so they might be questioning you philosophically to ask you to kind of go, why are you doing this? Like, think about your names. But they're probably not going to be judging you too harshly if they're even moderately good at their job. So in short, think about them, know what you're doing, but like realistically, if you can justify your actions, you're not going to get penalized because of the style if it's like consistent and makes sense.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And on the naming thing, my buddy Matt was always a big, and still is always a big nut on names. Like, he would rename variables dozens of times, and he was the one that made me feel okay with it. I was like, oh, okay, it is okay to rename a variable, because I don't need ReSharper to do it anymore. So I can just hit, rename. It's not the late 90s or anything. You can just hit rename, and it's going to find all of the references. It's even going to like if you rename things in at least in Writer, I assume it happens in all the editors now. Rename a class, it'll find all of the instances.
Retroactively to yeah.
It'll find all of the commented ones, and it's you should rename things often. I'm a big fan of, if you have a better name for something, just change it to the better name. And if you come up with a better name after that, change it again, and just keep coming up with slightly. If you're like, hey, this says it's this thing, but it's actually slightly different, rename it.
Yeah, I'd say my last point on that, because I'm gonna have to go as myself. The thing is, just philosophically, when you name something, anything, you're naming it based on why you're choosing a name, to infer what it does as a communication thing. So at the start, when it doesn't do anything yet, there's no name makes sense. It doesn't do anything. And it's not until you give it behavior that it starts to take on a name. But as a project grows, the thing changes, and so it takes on different jobs, and so its name needs to change. So don't think of a name as I need to pick the right name for this task. Pick a thing, write some code, look at the code, and name it based on what it does. So sometimes
or what it is. One of the two. Yeah.
Because I used to do that. I used to do all the time. I used to sit there and literally like spend hours trying to figure out all the right class names. But I like one of the most freeing things I ever did was learn to start by calling it like high score thing, stuff that does high scores. I will actively come up with a stupid meme name because I don't know yet what it does, and I will let that refine over time as the code changes. And I'm like, oh, well, this is actually doing the calculation for the high scores. Oh, high score calculator, I'll move that out. Or this bit's now doing the event dispatching. Oh, the score dispatcher. So I'll just like the names will arrive as you crystallize behavior. So names matter, but you'll figure them out as time goes by. So don't worry about getting it right the first time. That's kind of a general thesis.
Yeah, I 150% agree. There's another. I just shared. Everybody go check out Storey's Discord. I was going to pop up the mastery course thing again too, but there was a question here. I want to pop up an experienced developer's question, and we'll wrap this up. That I'm also trying to set standards for naming conventions at my work, and it's so convoluted with stupid prefixes. What do you guys think about prefixes like M_, B_, S_, or whatever? I generally hate all of them. S_ doesn't bother me too much because at least I know it's just somebody who's been coding for a long time and made a static variable. M_ drives me nuts because it's just a pointless. To be fair though, I just put a fucking underscore there, so it's not really any better. To show my private stuff, I just don't like the extra M there because I feel like it adds complexity it adds an extra character that I have to type. I've tried going without any prefix like an underscore or anything and just using editor tooling, which works great if you can get the whole team to buy in on stuff. If you can't, then people still tend to get confused. Although I think now with the latest versions of the editors, it's my argument for using an underscore even is slowly getting beaten away because they all kind of color code that stuff well now anyway. So you have thoughts on these? Do you use any of these?
My personal decision versus my reaction to it is quite different. As everyone knows, I overthink everything, and so I did legitimately spend a week deciding my answer to this. I did a lot of research. I checked out the origins of each of these cases, why they came about, what they were for, what each of the standards mean, what people use them for, which languages favor certain ones. and how I feel about each one and what value I think they add. And personally, I came to the conclusion I don't use any of them except for the underscore. And I think it's more than just a visual flourish. I use it informationally, because the underscore in a class scoped variable tells you which is the memory mapped variable, which tells you which one is the one to have the most efficient writes to when doing code later. So I think that is the most, if you're doing modifications, it's causing an extra layer of indirection if you use anything other than the underscore one. So it's actually very factually informative. I think that's a very valuable piece of information, and it's the only annotation I do, because it marks the difference between health, underscore health, and capital H health as being very declaratively, this one is memory mapped, these ones are references. So I use that one for my own reasoning. But I will say, to your point, when I see M underscore, I don't like it in code. But to your point, it tells me the person writing either came from a C background or is an older developer, which means I can kind of have a better sense of the code they write, and they probably care more about certain kind of problem solving in a way that's probably more beneficial. So I kind of like it when I see it in code, because it means the person writing the code probably cares a lot about either performance or the end result, or has more experience. But the actual standards I would promote in my code will not use it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like at the very least, it tells you that the people who wrote the code care about it enough to have some naming standards that they stick with, and have probably stuck with for a couple decades now. So
yeah, which goes back to what you were saying, is the reason these existed is going into the whole philosophy of, you used to have to write your code out, punch cards, put them through a machine, and then when you pressed button, if you had a debug error, you would have to go and redo the whole process again, and you would lose hours, if not days, of your life. And so being declarative about the variables being correct at the time of writing was vitally important. We didn't have real-time code analyzers with auto syntax highlighting, with all the information.
Instant builds.
So all of that stuff means that a lot of this is archaic callbacks to necessities from the past that we don't need anymore. You could argue that there's still good standards in certain cases, but the truth is that if people do it, it's because they've always done it. Not because it's good, not because it's valuable. It's because it's the way it was always done, because it used to be valuable.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, anyway, if you guys enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share and all that stuff. Come back on Friday for the Game Dev show. I'm sure we'll be talking a bunch, and I feel like there's something else going on tomorrow, but I can't remember what it is. So just make sure that you like, subscribe, go check out the Mastery course and Storey's Discord in the description below. And we'll see you all Friday, I guess.
Have a good one.
All right. See you.